Welcome to Lawyers Who Care, the video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond. And on each episode, we will meet a new lawyer and they will share stories of when they did go above and beyond for the benefit of their client. My name is Andrew Samalin. I'm the principal of Samalin Wealth, a nationally recognized wealth management firm for lawyers, law firms, and their clients. And let's welcome today a very special guest, Valicia Trowbridge. She is an attorney with Murad Immigration Law in Denver, Colorado, focusing on immigration law. Welcome, Valicia.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Valicia, tell us about your firm and tell us how you came to the law.
Sure. So we're located in Boulder. We
Boulder,
are
thank
a
you for the
small
correction.
firm. We're a small firm, and we are also a Latino-led firm, which is somewhat unusual. And we focus exclusively on immigration. We do humanitarian immigration. We do family-based immigration. And that is one of the things that really has always driven me, especially the humanitarian work and the family-based work. I ended up in the law. Actually, both of my parents are lawyers as well. And both of them worked in the Latino communities in the Central Valley of California and along the coast, and actually throughout a lot of other parts of California as well. And so in some ways, I always knew I was going to become a lawyer, but I do practice in a different area of law than my parents do. And for all that I am a Latina lawyer, which is somewhat unusual, I do.
What's the distinction? Other than the obvious, what is the distinction?
There are actually not a lot of Latinas, specifically female Latina lawyers. There are a lot of big structural reasons for that. But it's especially unusual to have, my mother, who is also a Latina lawyer, a mother-daughter duo of attorneys. That's really quite unusual. But I do think that it does give me an advantage in many ways. I grew up in California's Central Valley. It is a place that is very immigrant heavy. And I think that for all that I am not an immigrant, my parents aren't immigrants, and even my maternal grandparents are not immigrants, that growing up in that kind of community, it's given me a lot of insight into my clients and some of the challenges that they face. And obviously, I don't have that personal experience, but I do think that it's somewhat helpful to have that sort of background in the work that I do.
And you had mentioned as we started today, or before we got on air, you had mentioned that there was a story that you wanted to share. Can you share that with everyone?
Sure. So I'm sure that everyone is familiar with the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine. And in February of 2022, the Antonov aircraft factory was destroyed in Kiev. And I have clients who live just 2 blocks away from that factory. And they had to flee. So I will use pseudonyms, Anna and Andre. They fled from Kiev. They spent 2 days in the subways hiding as the Russian bombardment of Kiev continued. And then they fled to the countryside where their mother, Natalia, lived. But the war continued there as well, and so they ended up fleeing to Poland. And in Poland, they did find some refuge, but it was going to be temporary. So they crossed the border into Poland on March 1st of 2022, and they could only find housing that would last through March 31st. And so they were faced with potential homelessness and that tremendous uncertainty and definitely not being able to go back home, certainly not to Kiev, even now. And they have a U.S. citizen daughter and sister, and they had an opportunity to come and try to seek refuge in the United States. So the problem is, how do you get from Poland, where they could end up homeless, to the United States. And so the way that they chose to do that was through Mexico. So I met with them in Tijuana. So on the Mexican side, I crossed the border on foot and went and met with them. And at that time, there was a flood of refugees that was starting to show up at the borders, all from Ukraine, all seeking refuge in the United States. And it was actually, that's right. And it was really amazing, actually, the way in which people united to provide support. So we had people from churches, both Russian and Ukrainian churches, interestingly enough, from California, who had also crossed into the border and who were providing support for this flood of refugees that were there. And they actually also had a lot of support from the Mexican police. So I showed up at the border with my clients. Right? So Natalia, who's the grandmother, Anna, the mother, and Andre, her minor son. And we waited at the border. So there was an organized way at that point for people to present themselves at the border, put themselves on a list, and then be screened by CBP in order to seek humanitarian parole. But we waited for 8 hours outside in Tijuana. And at one point, it started to rain. And the Mexican police and these volunteers from these Russian churches, they helped us all get into a bus shelter. And they brought, it's actually kind of funny, several of the volunteers, they brought pizza from across the border. So they went back into the United States and purchased big boxes of pizza to feed everybody. And they had big crates of snacks and water bottles. They were really providing a lot of support to these people that were showing up at the border because there was a war in their country. But after 8 hours, my clients were called forward, and I had prepared packets for them to seek humanitarian parole. And they presented those packets to CBP, Custom and Border Patrol, and they were ultimately granted humanitarian parole and were permitted to enter the United States. So they went from, hiding in the subway while the Russian bombardment of Kiev was going on to being able to, come into the United States, be granted humanitarian parole, and find themselves safe.
Wow. Through Mexico.
Through Mexico.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible story. By the way, just so everyone knows, today my guest is Valicia Trowbridge. She's an attorney with Murad Immigration Law in Boulder,
That's right.
Colorado, focusing on immigration law. Valicia, so that people can get in touch with you, can you share your phone number twice?
Sure. It is area code 303-449-5535, 303-449-5535.
And they can find you in social media, and do you have a website?
It can at murad'immigration.com. So that's MURAD immigration.com.
Wonderful. Everyone, this has been the Lawyers Who Care video show podcast that highlights attorneys who go above and beyond. And as you can see, Valicia certainly has done so in a very, very trying time. If you're an attorney or know one that might be appropriate for this, please reach out to us at success@samalinwealth.com. That's success@samalinwealth.com. Valicia, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.